A.T. Pinto is your
Father's name, yeah.
And this is the same flat that you wrote about in the
Yes,
book.
indeed, yeah.
And A.T. stands for?
Augustine Timothy. My parents' love affair was built around books. Because they weren't marrying their libraries, they were just marrying each other.
And these books were locked.
Oh, yes.
And the cases were locked when your mother was around.
Yeah.
Because she used to pick up the books.
It would be possible that she
in
would...
a frenzy and fling them out of
this
this
window.
balcony.
You know, in the beginning of the book, there is a moment when I talk about the cliff face of the tenement across. That's the cliff face. And that is the suburb old tree that I talk about. Small Bombay flat, but it's a city of small flats. It's actually intensely human because you learn to live with each other in a way that you don't learn if you have a room into which you can go and slam the door and say, I'm cutting you all out of the world. They're in your heart. They're in your mind. You've taken them into that room with you. What's the point of slamming the door?
I'm here in Jerry Pinto's house. If you don't know who Jerry Pinto is, start reading. Google him, find out. You should. Most of the reading public absolutely know Jerry Pinto from, I don't know, how many books have you written?
14 now.
14 books on poems, biographies, films, cinema, and then finally this amazing, amazing book, M and the Big Hoom. It's about his family. Jerry, could you read from here? This we know.
This we knew about her, even when everything else was a mystery. M wrote. She wrote when she was with us. She wrote when no one was around. She wrote postcards. She wrote letters in books. She wrote in other people's diaries, in telephone diaries, on the menus of takeaway places. Did she really want to be a writer? Or did she want to be a teacher? In some of the letters she wrote Augustine, she was obviously flaunting her ability to write. She was demonstrating her charm, her effortlessness, her skill. She was suggesting to the world that she be taken seriously as a writer. No one did. I didn't. I didn't even see it. I thought she wrote as she broadcast, without much effort, without much thought. I have discovered since that such effortlessness is not easy to achieve, and its weightlessness is in direct proportion to the effort put in. But unless she wrote drafts in secret and destroyed them, she seems to have achieved lift-off without effort. And then there was no reason for her to work at it, really. She had no audience other than us.
Thank you. You've written about her effortlessness, the way she spoke throughout your book. Is that how she really spoke?
Oh yes, entirely. My mother was incapable of a comment that was ordinary
Or boring.
Or boring or everyday. So everything that happened was just simply swallowed up. It was sponged in, it was taken up, and it was reversed, it was changed, it was mauled, mangled, and it came out as something else altogether. This made life vastly exciting in a certain way, and terribly tedious at a certain level, and difficult also, because you never knew where you were with an average ordinary comment like it's very hot today, because then she'd be saying things about how you're feeling hot because you're 17 and you're at your sexual peak, and you said no, it's just hot, and she'd say I'm not hot, I'm just 45, so how can I be hot? And you wouldn't know where the conversation was going. So every conversation was like wandering through this labyrinth of possibilities, and you felt like you were holding a thread which she was drawing you into some secret set of meanings. And often you wondered, if you participated in this, were you actively involving yourself in this madness, or were you just being worked on, And both things were not very comforting, actually, because you thought, the world teaches you to treat people who have mental problems as the other, as someone else, and you're in charge of your mind. Now, in a conversation with M, this was being challenged because you were being led through the nose. You didn't know what was going on. And about 2 days later, you discovered that some joke that she made was actually a reference to something she'd read. So there was a literary reference behind. You couldn't say open your mouth without her saying ha ha ha. Which meant, like, that was that old Johnny, yes papa, eating sugar, no papa, telling lies, yes papa, open your mouth, ha ha ha. So it seemed as if everything had to be part of a whole series of elaborate charades, and you were just playing along with them, and you were being played like a musical instrument as well. Who then was the sane person in charge? Difficult to tell. Really.
Well, two questions come up with that. One is, you have crafted this book. There's a lot of craft in it. You can see a lot of work in it with language, with the crafting of the structure. And hers was effortless completely, as you said. For you, it seems effortless.
Madhu, I love you very much and thank you so much for that. I will treasure it really, because a compliment from the intelligent is always a valuable thing and an important thing. And I've grown up with your byline. But I don't think I've ever written a line that hasn't been, looked at 10 minutes later with horror and despair. Like, who wrote this line? Can this person even think he's a writer? So I think,
So you're very different from Arundhati Roy, who's writing the same line again is like taking the same breath twice. How many times did you breathe and bleed?
I don't want to say Arundhati was like inventing a beautiful myth and a lovely dream, but the god of small things was several breaths rebreathed. No. I'm sure she possibly thought each sentence out until it was lapidary perfection, and then she laid it down on the page. So she didn't have to rebreathe the breath. For me, it's not like that. For me, it's kind of like, writing is a lovely, exciting, it's not an occupation, it's just like having fun with words, playing with them. So I'm doing it all the time.
And that came from her, it came from M.
Totally. From this almost this constant preoccupation with how language was, how what headlines were, whose name could be rearranged to form what pattern. All these were games that were played constantly all the time.
When I first opened your book, I got a little shocked at the use of the word mad, because we have now become accustomed to being politically correct, and you don't say mad. There are many other words that are used euphemistically to describe a person's mental imbalance. But to me, that was the education also, that using a word which has almost been banned, like the blacks re-owned nigger. You weren't allowed to say it, but they say it to each other. It's the same kind of thing. I mean, once I interviewed Mayawati, and she said, "मैं गर्व से कहती हूँ मैं चमार हूँ." And at that time, News Track was on Doordarshan, and they made us take out the word chamar. That chamar is not allowed. But I said, she's changing the meaning. She's making the word good. I couldn't argue with that. So in one sense, you've taken us into a space where one is really afraid, because when you deal with anyone with a mental imbalance, first thing an average person feels is fear. How am I going to deal with this? How am I going to say anything to her? What is it going to mean to her? And when you talk about that person, you never use the word mad. You use all kinds of... So this was thought through, because you grew up with the word. But even then, the word sounded awful to you as a child, I presume.
Just responding to the political correctness thing that you said, I'm all for political correctness if it is about kindness. If it is a word, I grew up being called Vedi ka bachcha, which means the mad woman's son. And when you're an 8-year-old struggling for your position in society, to be called Vedi ka bachcha is very painful at a certain level, and it means that you develop a very strong awareness of the power of words to hurt. So if it hurts, I think we need to think about it. Now, as far as M was concerned, she was retaking that word. Just as you said, the blacks retook the N word, right? She was retaking the word. She was using it as a tool. She was saying, if anyone said, why are you saying that? She would say, because I'm mad. And as soon as that happened, it meant the question was, you are asking me for a rational opinion. You're asking me for a rational standpoint when you're denying me that rational standpoint. You've already labeled me as someone incapable of doing it. Now I ask. So it was in her own way, she was challenging the status quo. She was simply saying, if I'm mad, then I'm excused, right? And I can do what I want. Now live with it. You've given me this label, you've told me who I am, now I'm going to act that out for you as well. So often, sometimes when one was watching, one was trying to decode whether this was the mental illness speaking, or the person who was ducking behind the mental illness, or the person who was owning it, or the person who was challenging it. It was about nuance. All the time it was about nuance. And I think actually that concern with craft that you talked about was also about nuance. How do you take language, which is at the end of the day a weak tool? You know, Dylan Thomas says it beautifully. Milliners use language and grocers use language, and poets must use that same language. Or novelists must, or journalists must. And our use of it will be sacred, will be in a way that we want to deploy language for maximum effect. We want to drive these trucks into people's minds and park them in their ideas and rewrite how they think. And we want to re-show them the world, and we want to reinvent the universe for them. That's what we do with the language that they are ordering chicken Manchurian with. You know, I mean, so our challenge must be to how do we make it new? How do we take this language, this everyday quotidian thing, and shake it up so that it's something fresh and vibrant with energy and enthusiasm? And that is craft. The stories, my God, Madhu, everyone has a story. You have a story that you should be telling. You know, your father and Raj Kapoor and growing up in that mohalla that we were talking about, that's a story. It should be told. It should be told right now. You shouldn't be doing this interview. You should be going and writing this story down. That's what I believe. But after you've settled down to writing it, then you have to say to yourself, this is also about a book. And it is a book that needs to do something. And how do I get it to do that something? Whatever it is, to entertain, or to amuse, or to inform, or to educate, or whatever you choose.
Or to devastate.
Or to devastate.
A friend of mine, I was at a dinner the day before I left Delhi, and I said, I've just finished Jerry Pinto's book, and I was describing it. She said, I've had it for a long time, I haven't read it. Then I got an SMS yesterday. She says, I finished it. I'm really saddened and devastated. I said, I had the opposite reaction. I was exhilarated.
Thank you.
I really was, because I don't see, we all in some form and various degrees go through trauma, as you said. But to be able to use it as grist for the mill, to create something, not only a book, but to create a life of what you are today. And you've used, obviously, everything that has happened to you, you've used it in every form. I think that is your biggest gift that you've given yourself and the rest of the world.
Thank you very much.
Because this is an example, really, for young people who may be going through traumatic times, maybe less or more. I mean, there are all kinds of stories of molestation and abuse and all kinds of things. And there is a way out, not the way you think that a person might think. There are many ways to use that material, and I thank you for that. It's really... Now, another section, if you can read from here, that pain to really up to here.
This is a section where I talk about my loss of faith and how I would read the Bible, and especially the story of Jesus and his passion, which is his crucifixion, and feel a genuine empathy and a genuine pain, and how one day that pain vanished. That pain vanished one day. I read the Passion through to check myself again. I read another version by another evangelist and was left unmoved. I remember being vaguely relieved and slightly guilty. I did not even realize that at that moment I had lost my faith. What I had left was a syrupy sentimentality and an aesthetic appreciation of the Gregorian chant, the form of the fasting Buddha, and a love of stories. This is the standard equipment of the neo-atheist, eager to allow other people to believe, unwilling to proselytize to his own world, which seems bleaker without God, but easier to accept. No one could offer any explanation for the suffering I watched my mother go through. Nothing I read or heard fitted with the notion of a compassionate God and God's compassion, one uncomplicated, unequivocal miracle of kindness, was the only thing that could have helped. The sophisticated arguments of all the wise men of faith, their talk about the sins of a past life, only convinced me that there was something capricious about God. How could one demand perfect submission from those who are imperfect? How could one create desire and then expect everyone to pull the plug on it? And if God were capricious, then God was imperfect. If God were imperfect, God was not God. But being an atheist offers a terrible problem. There is nothing you can do with the feeling that the world has done you wrong or that you in turn have hurt someone. I wavered and struggled for a long time before I exiled myself from God's mansion.
Thank you. To me, that was one of the most moving passages in the book. And you know, Arun Shourie wrote Does He Know a Mother's Heart? Basically raising the question which he raised also in a workshop with the Dalai Lama, where he got up and asked, why does God, if there is a God, punish someone who's completely good and innocent? Why does he punish a child with suffering? And then he wrote a book on it. Book on his questioning of all the scriptures, Islamic, Christianity and Hinduism. And he basically now is more veering towards Buddhism, practicing Buddhism. And it seems almost the same kind of sort of journey and conclusion, that if there is somebody who is doing all this, then why is he doing such evil things? Did you ever reconcile yourself to God after that? Was there reconciliation?
I wish I could.
I'm coming back, God.
Sure. I wish I could say that that my exile is complete. I wish I could say that I totally believed. Both places seem like there would be a way of living offered. If you believe, then all you have to do is, as soon as someone gives you an explanation, cleave unto it. Someone says, this is the sins of a past birth that are being visited on her. She will be well in the next birth. Or she will burn all her prarabdha karma out and that will be it. And as soon as you say, yes, oh, is that it? Oh, my goodness, okay, thank heavens. Now I understand. Or someone says, you cannot understand God's ways. They are mysterious. They are beyond you. Don't understand them. Submit to them. And you say, okay, I submit. I set it down. It's yours. And it's over, okay? Or whatever is asked of you. If you can actually just do that, you have a way to live. You have a way to confront the intense pain of someone you love and the pain that their pain causes you and the pain that, a secondary pain that you should be worried about your pain when you should be worried about theirs. It's just terrible. And if you were an atheist, then you would look at it and say, well, it's pain. It happens because there are nerve endings and the same nerve endings bring us pleasure. And so if you want nerve endings, they sometimes bring you pleasure, sometimes bring you pain. Live with it. There's nothing more than this. Death ends fun. That's it. Okay? It's over. Now, unfortunately, I wish I could be decisive about it and just stop either one. But I wonder, there's something, when I say syrupy sentimentality and a love of stories and the form of all of us in India, if you have an aesthetic appreciation, it's a God appreciation. If you like Bharatnatyam, it's someone saying Krishna is so gorgeous and I love him. If you go into a temple and you look around and you think architecture and listen to the way the sound reverberates off the ceiling and comes to you, that's God again. Wherever you go, there's God. Whatever your aesthetic is, it's a God aesthetic here. You get away. How do you get away? So you don't get away. So some days when things are going well, God and I are great buddies. We travel together and I look out and I see the shape of a peepal tree and I say, you so rock. What a lovely peepal tree. And there is other days when, when things are not going so well, when I think evolution has produced a very beautiful peepal tree. And even my aesthetic appreciation of this is part of my evolutionary desire to keep some greenery around because I know that's good for me. Both, when I'm saying these things, both sound hollow, no? Both sound hollow. And why do they sound hollow? Because we know somewhere that both are kind of incomplete without the other. Just a little bit.
In what way? I mean, if you say reach the stage of the Dalai Lama or Buddhists who absolutely do not believe in God.
And I wonder, does the Dalai Lama want Tibet? If he wants Tibet, he can't be Buddhist. You can't want anything.
Yeah,
I'm
but
joking. That's a simplification. I'm saying.
I don't even think he wants Tibet.
No, I know.
I think his people want Tibet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
he probably just smiles and looks on. See, I believe that if you look at even the greatest of mystics, okay, like Muktabai, say, in the Maharashtrian tradition, or Saint John of the Cross, or Teresa of Avila, there are moments of such transcendence. I think it is Bahina Bai who says, I could sit here forever until I died. Okay. Then Muktabai says, an ant flew into the sky and swallowed the sun. Okay. That's the feeling of swallowing the sun, such epiphany, such joy inside, sunbursts of joy. It's just magnificent. And all of them also complain, why hast thou turned thy face away? What is this long dark night of the soul? So God doesn't seem to be like a constant even in their lives. There are more. Mother Teresa's letters, which caused such a halla gulla about, she lost her faith. And of course she had her doubts. Of course she had her great periods of aridity. Every mystic from the first mystic will tell you, Rumi will tell you that, Ninda Stuti is all about God, where did you go? Mi yekli pardeshi, says
so maybe he wasn't
Vatsala.
there in the first place.
Which is
Again,
also
we're bouncing.
horrifyingly possible. Horrifyingly possible. Suppose it actually is. Suppose
And
there's nothing.
how did M deal with God? What did she talk to you about
A
God?
series of, for instance, I remember my mother and me in church, and my mother singing, the whole congregation singing, I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior, I surrender all. My mother standing next to me singing, I surrender something, something to thee, my blessed Savior, I surrender something. So I'm pulling her hand and saying, it's I surrender all. She said, but I'm not surrendering all. I'm surrendering some things. So I'm only going to surrender some things. So, and we're discussing this in the middle of church when everyone's whoosh and fish. So I'm saying, but they're saying I surrender all. She said, do you think they want to surrender everything? They don't want to surrender everything. They just want him to do their bidding. So they're lying. So I said, they're lying in church. So she said, yeah. So I also started, I surrender something. I surrender something. I'm just like, and actually in that moment, again there is a challenge to the status quo. Are you singing I surrender all and giving up your desire? Are you saying you actually give yourself to Jesus? If you are, then you have to go out and forgive your brother. And you have to, agree that the Goa property can be divided into two and both can take shares, right? Which you're fighting over. So it's a question of actually a challenge to the hypocrisy of the easy statement about God, whatever God is. The problem with, I think, people who have an easy faith is that they think in cliches about God, and you'll never find that in the greatest of mystics. God is a very strange
God
thing.
knows best.
He is there when you don't know him. Always a he him. Those are problems for me. And I'm not saying that I believe. I'm not saying I don't believe either. I feel but I've covered all my bases. I went and did Ganga Snan. Okay, so that is done. Then I went to Ajmer twice. So that is Ardha Mecca. Okay, so I've gone twice. So it's double. It's once, right? So if it's Allah up there, I'm ready. If it's a Hindu god, then I have done Ganga Snan. And I have done the Mon Girivallam at Arunachalam. So which is not the abode of Shiva, but is Shiva. Okay, so I've done a Mon Girivallam. I went around the whole of it, walked around the whole of it in the quiet of the morning in silence. And so I'm liberated there as well. And I have done 9 novenas to the Sacred Heart on 9 consecutive Fridays with Holy Confession and Holy Communion. So I'm safe. I've just covered all my...
You just have to go to Lourdes now. Finish it off.
Yeah. So I must say, I was much more struck by the sacredness of Banaras than the sacredness of Rome.
Really?
For me, yeah, that was, I couldn't...
Because Rome is money, it's wealth.
And it is...
the richest.
It is Baroque beauty. And there is something about the ghats in the night, not during the day, but in the night, the ghats have a quiet and a very monumental kind of beauty and a simple beauty, which can be very chilling. It just, but very as if someone is saying, if it is like any, if there is something, then this is what it might be like, chilling.
Just being in that nothing space.
And then you look across the river and it's empty. Empty. You read Diana X sitting on the ghats, sacred city of light, magnificent feeling. But it's, you know, but sometimes I feel, for me, it's about words at the end. It's about poetry. It's about scripture. It's about urvameva ruk, like let me slip like a cucumber, free from the pod. It's just the beauty of this metaphor is what is that it, and if that is it, then it'll have to be a god of language. And now,
so now we have to invent a god of language. Saraswati is not enough.
I think Saraswati doesn't seem to be really concerned about
knowledge.
No, mortals. She's concerned about abstractions. That's the problem. So she's concerned about knowledge in the larger scheme of things and things like that. She's not concerned whether you are in pain tomorrow. So poets, writers, if we think Saraswati is our god, we've not got a great deal.
No, we need to rework that with her.
Yeah, exactly. I think Lakshmi is a lot better. Clean the house, paint everything, make sure it's nice.
Then I'll show up.
Yeah, I'll show up. I'll stay. Saraswati, who knows what she wants? Who knows when she stays or when she goes? Don Moraes didn't write for 17 years. Why?
Don Moraes?
Yeah, no poems for 17 years.
The bottle.
Good one.
That was the problem. I read the short bit about your visit that Dom took you home. And it really struck home because there were so many evenings like that. And every evening that we were invited, there was always high drama.
There's something really tempestuous there.
I think both were so hyper intelligent.
Yeah.
And
there wasn't room enough for both of them in that marriage.
Because Leela was extraordinarily charming, which was, what was it like working with her and getting her story out?
It was absolutely magnificent, and it was absolutely difficult at the same time, because you see, most people don't think that when there is a storyteller in front of you, the magnificent storyteller uses everything. So when Leela was telling you a story about, say, a customs officer, she would invent the customs officer with her face. So she would say, and then we went up to the customs officer, and just that much would give you this big fat man with a slightly, pompous air, etc., etc.
But she never let facts get in the way of a good story. She did tend to.
You will note, Madhu, I wrote it in the first person. So Leela is telling you her story. I am not verifying a single fact in that story with my authorial sort of prerogative to say Leela then went. It is I then went. So she told me, like a good scribe, I wrote down. Okay? So I was very happy with people who don't let facts get in the way of good stories. But she was concerned about other people, and there were many lovely stories that we could have told that, people would ring up, and there were two kinds of people who would ring up. One who would say, I'm in your book, na? And the other would say, I'm not in your book, no? Both kinds of persons. It seemed to be like this, there was general consternation at being excluded, and there was consternation at being included as well. So it was, and see, this is the thing. I think there is a moment also when you realize that this is the definitive version. This is what my life has been reduced to. 250 pages. It can't be. I think there's that moment of like, gosh, is that all? At the same time, there was never a moment when she was not really extremely supportive of the book. Okay, so even when she didn't want something in the book, she would ask me whether I didn't want it in the book. And I'd say, no, I wrote it. So finally I got to the point at which I realized that when she said, Jerry, is it possible, do you think, that, do you really like this passage? I'd say, okay, we'll cut it out. I'd say, no, it's lovely, I love it. But do you like it? And I'd see that this was her way of saying, I don't want this passage. And I just cut it out. Because at the end, there was Jim Crace told me that Martin Amis once said that a true writer is a person who would save his manuscript from a burning house instead of his child. Now, I think that is Martin Amis being a polemical young man, powered on several, on several intoxicants of various kinds. I think he's being polemical and saying that, your manuscript or your words are really important to you. For me, I'd save a kitten over my manuscript. I'd save someone else's child over manuscript, not mine. I mean, so for me, it's not about, I don't think I'd ever want to hurt anybody with a book. I don't think any book is worth hurting someone you love,
Do you think that quality comes from M or from your father?
No, I think from my father rather than M, because M was
Quite hurtful.
yeah, oblivious to the fact that her brutal honesty could hurt you. It was a straightforward brutal honesty. I mean, if she would not allow you to lie at any level. So if you said I didn't get that job, she'd say because there are many other better people who got it. It's just like, it's not because someone, other mothers would say things like, yeah, it's just such an unfair world. So it's a fair world. Someone was better qualified than you, they got the job, you didn't get the job. Don't cry about it, make tea. So in a way, you'd limp off from that encounter. But
like when you came home with a bad day, when you're calling people in times when you're trying to call sources and nobody was taking your call.
Don't you remember those days, Madhu? Just like endlessly trying to get quotes. Those things that made you feel like, it's like, I will write better quotes for all these people and put them in their mouths. No, joking. I mean, you just needed those quotes at that point. You just needed to get somebody to talk to you, and you were low down on the totem pole, so no one knew your name, so no one was going to call you. And then you come home and your mother's insulting, and you just lash out. And
but she did console you sometimes.
Oh yes, of course. There was often very...
in a magical way.
Yeah, in a magical and slightly, tangential way. But I'm saying, I think, carers, people who have to care for those who are unwell, have so little support in our society. And every single one of their failures is recorded with delight. And all the other little ordinary heroics, every morning I get up and I stand in the balcony and I just watch this lower middle class woman carrying her 5-foot son in calipers in her arms to school. Okay, so she probably walks about 1 kilometer or 2 carrying an almost fully grown young man in her arms because she wants him to have a chance at an education. And to me, that's the ordinary heroism of everyday life, which is really, really much, much greater than, soldiers in battle or the other things that we think of as heroic. This is mother courage. This is Mother India in a kind of terrible way, because we've not arranged anything for her. As a society, we failed the handicapped, we failed the challenged, we failed the differently abled, we failed ourselves as well.
Actually, we, as a culture, generally leave the wounded behind. You see anyone who, and I've been through personal stuff like this, they are completely oblivious to, in fact, it's a time for them to walk all over you if you're going through something like that. And this is what you describe also in your book, that there are people who, as you told me, that children taunt you.
And also,
taunted you.
Oddly enough, India has a great ability to also just accept in a kind of very strange way, in the sense that there would be moments when there would be unexpected kindness, taxi drivers who would not, you would say, M would be in the cab with you and be railing away and maybe even lash out, and you'd say, Bhai Sahab, I'm sorry, my mother has a mental problem, and they'd say, koi baat nahi, just without anything, just there's no, that's okay, that's it, I get it, it's not an issue. And those were also things that were, would sometimes make you cry, literally, as you sat in that cab, So I feel we have an odd society because it's deeply invasive, but because of its invasiveness, it seems to, once the story is out there, it's fine with, it's okay with the story. So my mother and I traveled in cars, in buses, in taxis, and in trains, and there were often very strange moments, but most of the time it was just absorbed into this grand guignol of, of our society, that it's always a drama that's going on. So this is part of that great drama. So
What about your father? And did he also have this kind of language and humor? Not in your book, but how did he respond to her?
I think, I find it very difficult to reconcile the man I knew with the man that many people remembered as this very dynamic and, sort of mercury fast young man who was
what
always...
she wrote about
Yes,
in letters.
rushing about and bouncing off walls and flirting madly with the women in the office and buying everyone flowers. My dad was built for endurance. He was kind of stolidly there, and he was our axis mundi. We sort of spun around him because that was the way it was. So you don't ever notice the ground under your feet, because it's the ground under your feet. It's as simple as that. And so I think he gets a bit of a raw deal in the book. He doesn't get as much as he should because she takes over the scene. In that sense, there's a performativeness that does not allow for another person to be, So I think in that, the responsiveness is a lovely word that you use, because it is about responding all the time. It's never about, taking charge of the thing. It's managing how anything could be managed, how anything was to be managed only in terms of her.
Tell me, your father, he died after your mother died?
When people ask me about whether this book is autobiographical, I say it's 95% fiction and 95% non-fiction at the same time. And the intersection set is where you come in and make it the book you want it to be. I think in real life, in the way it played out, my father died first and my mother lived on for nearly 14 years afterwards. And those were not, shall we say, the finest times in my life, because they needed other skill sets to be put into action.
How old were you then?
I was 21, enough to, I had my father long enough to but it would have been lovely if it did. You always think that, I think about your parents. It would be nice if a few more years. I think for everyone. So I don't see myself as being, but Madhu, this was about how do I say to people, don't give up on love, and how do I say it hurts, I know it hurts, and there's a lot of pain there because you're vulnerable, because you love. So how do I say it's all right? So I wrestled with that for a long time. For at least a year I wrestled with the problem of how do I end this? How do I make this seem like it's not just grey and grimy and miserable and sad? How do I let them go? How do I open the cage? Yes. And I thought the only way to do it would be to suggest that there was a quiet moment when M was released. So that was the time when I decided that it would have to be a novel, it would have to be fiction, and it would have to be about the reader and not me. Because that, I think, is craft. Craft is when you say to yourself, it's not about my story, it's not about my catharsis, it's not about my healing. It's about the fact that this will go out and become a book and someone will read it, and I have to care for that reader. That reader's given me his time, her time, his attention, her attention. They've taken stuff out of what they could have been doing and given it to my artistic endeavor. I must respect that. I must meet them more than half of the way. I mustn't give it to all of them. I must leave spaces for them to come in and make it their own and experience the book. I understand that. But I must respect them as well. And for that, I chose to let M go.
And in some way, if you remember reading Dom Moraes' book, My Son's Father, he writes about his mother.
Yeah.
But he never used it like you did. He kept the pain, he kept the torture, he kept the self-pity, in fact. And if you remember, there's a section in his book where he drops his goldfish bowl because of his mother. His mother in another incident, mother drags him to the Taj Hotel to catch her husband with another woman. And I don't think personally, and I don't want to be a psychiatrist or anything, but from his writing, although Dom was a friend, I would not attempt to say that he was traumatized, but from his writing, I don't think he ever let go that grief or pain, which you have been able to do.
Thank you so much. It's interesting why that Dom keeps coming up, because Beryl, his mother, was a really talented woman. I mean, she was India's first postgraduate doctor, and seems to have been really bright. And Frank and Beryl together must have been magic, just like Leela and Dom, because such a brilliant journalist, such a fine doctor together, and then this mental illness thing turns up, and this quietness and a sadness and a darkness about that time. And one can only say this, that we are living in happier times now, a little happier time. I mean, I know that there is I went recently to a psychiatric ward in Bombay, in a hospital where there are 2 psychiatrists in attendance, and there was a 14-year-old boy who had been given electroconvulsive
They're still doing
therapy.
it?
Yes.
And in your book,
14 shocks were going to be administered
why
for
are
a
they
boy
still doing it?
who had a violent episode in class. I didn't know how to process that, but I believe that when more light is thrown on this problem, there's more awareness of it, more people talking about it, more people just, every day I get a letter saying, my mother, my uncle, my father, my brother, my sister, my cousin, friend I lived with, we couldn't have glass in the house. We had to watch her all the time. When she was sad, it was this way. And I feel it isn't 6 degrees of separation, Madhu. It's 1 degree. We are 1 degree away from somewhere and a place and a person whom we love who's being traumatized by their head. But it is slightly better because the pharmacopoeia is better, awareness is better. There are more places where, where in M's time it wasn't like that. In Beryl's time it must have been even worse.
But in your book, you and your sister kind of took the responsibility and the guilt of that electrotherapy treatment, whereas you weren't really involved in it. Like, you didn't go there and ask the doctor to do it, or you didn't ask, even stand by. You just didn't know what they were doing until you picked her up and saw the burn. And both of you, and you said your sister just cried. That's a very young age to take on guilt like that, to feel so responsible for your mother, that when some other doctor does something to her and you feel that you did it, that's very difficult to get over.
I think one of the most sad things about being a child, and there are many magical things about being a child, discovery and newness and toys and games and the fun you can have with color and paint and all that sort of thing. But one of the terrible things is you never know what you're responsible for. You don't know. So your parents are getting divorced and you feel it's your fault. And it's there as a kind of active, horrible ache inside your heart. You know that you're responsible. There's a lovely story, little vignette about the Blitz in London. A little girl on the toilet, not allowed to pull the flush ever because the flush is a bit risky. So she's supposed to call her parents and pull the flush. The first time she pulls the flush, a bomb drops on the house. And all that's left is her sitting on the pot, and she says, "Oh, look what I've done now." And my heart goes out to that little girl, because there are hundreds of children who are taking on themselves responsibilities that they do not have any reason to take on, because they just, they don't know how to process the world. So often your sense of responsibility and guilt are in no sense related to the way the real world is. And often things that you should be guilty about, you're not guilty about, So I just heard a chilling story about this young man and his wife, both professionals, who told their mother, get dressed, we're going out for dinner, and took her out, drove for a long while, stopped at an old age home, parked her there and drove away. I think
Recently?
Yeah, recently. I just found that just not, I thought it was like some horrible Roald Dahl story, That's the kind of thing you do to some vicious old woman, and that's a good joke. But you did this to your mother. Oof.
But there are people who do this regularly at the Kumbh Mela.
Oh,
They take old people there
Banaras.
and lose them.
Yeah, it's just such a convenient thing. I think you're right. That line is lovely. I might pinch it. We just leave the wounded behind. And I think as a society, as our shame grows, we may grow. But shame is important. If you feel shame, you don't spit on the road. If you feel shame, you don't throw acid at a woman who refuses your offer of friendship. If you feel shame, you don't rob 3,000 crores from the poor. But we don't have a very well-developed sense of shame. So we continue doing this.
No, I think that's because much of our mythology is rationalizing whatever you actually want to do.
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
What does Krishna...
Says the minority community writer. It's carefully avoiding.
Yeah, you should avoid it. But I would say that Arjun, Krishna spends a long time convincing Arjun that it's okay to do kill his own kin. And I think rationalization comes very quickly in our culture, very easily. We can do the most horrible things and say it is the hideous word, practical thing to do.
Yeah.
And that is...
True.
So let's end on a more prosaic note. What is the next thing you're working on?
I don't work on one thing at a time because that gets a little boring. I'm working on the next novel, of course, but this took me 20 years. Who knows the next novel may take me another 20 years.
So you're teaching also?
Yes, I teach at the SCM Sophia. I teach because I feel, I was a Mahim boy. I lived in this house, and my world was the sea and the mosque and the church and 7 cinemas around. And then I became a journalist. I was a mathematics tutor first and a school librarian, and I sold some, dawai daru, because I thought that might make me some money and I needed money. And then I became a journalist. My world just blew open. And then one day I remember someone said, Prince Philip is coming to Mahim to inaugurate the Mahim Nature Park. And I thought, in Mahim, royalty and Jerry Pinto is going to be there. I was like, what? Me? And, so journalism has been really good to me. I think all the terrors are there. We are the worst paid of the world's professionals. We like to do chow meow. But what a lovely, vibrant life feeling.
But that's why you become a journalist, to be there when it's happening.
And to meet people who make things happen and to listen to them saying, I would never rewrite a sentence. It would be like rebreathing a breath. But I was there when she was saying this and looking gorgeous and intellectual and mallu and all of it. It was just so wonderful. So I feel I'd like to introduce young people to this excitement, to this possibility of this excitement. When they go out, my kids go out and do beat work, which is, I send them to the worst possible suburb in the city where they're supposed to generate stories. And the first time they go, they are close to having panic attacks about going in, The third time they're going, they're loving it. And, by the fourth time they have friends, they have like a new world there. They've got a whole new set of coordinates, and to just watch their confidence growing is so magnificent. It's such a gift to me.
Thank you very, very much, Jerry. I'll have to do another interview with you about the other part of your life.
Yeah, sure.
And this was just lovely talking about
Thank
your
you
book.
so much.